about me too. And I want to thank both Minister Hartato and Mr. Fendi for referring to the article that I wrote in Project Syndicate. I had no idea that it would be the top trending article in Project Syndicate for many weeks. So it was read all around the world, not just in Indonesia. And no one challenged my claim, which is central to the piece which I wrote down there, that President Jokowi is the most effective, democratically elected leader in the world today. I know that's a very strong claim to make, but nobody challenged it. And so it shows that Indonesia is blessed today with extraordinary leadership that it should be proud of. And at the same time, it should be aware of it and frankly, not take it for granted. When you consider how so many large countries in the world are struggling, really struggling. I mean, let me give some examples. United States is struggling, it's badly polarized, divided. Brazil is struggling, and I can go on the list, but I would be more diplomatic and not mention too many countries. But Indonesia is very blessed. And precisely because Indonesia is so blessed with good leadership today, Indonesia has an extraordinary opportunity when it takes over the chairmanship of G20 next year. And that is the thrust of what I'm going to say to you in the next 30 minutes or so. Because I believe that if there's one country that can lift up G20 to a higher level than it has enjoyed in the past, it is Indonesia. And I believe that for two big reasons. One is that the G20 basically has been mismanaged and mishandled for a long time. And I'll explain why. And also, the Indonesia has a culture, which is deep-seated in Indonesia, which has actually been shared with ASEAN, which is the culture of musyawara and mufakat, consultation and consensus. And that's what the G20 needs today very badly, consultation and consensus. And Indonesia, if you can export that culture of musyawara and mufakat, can help to transform the world and not just Indonesia. So that's what I propose to say to you as my thesis. So that is our global situation today. If I can summarize what I've said so far, the world has shrunk. We have become one, humanity. We must come together and collaborate. But to collaborate, we need institutions to bring us together. The best such institution is the G20. And that's why it has a lot of promise. And as you know, the G20 was the one that saved the world from the global financial crisis. So if you look at it in terms of the problem is that we have to deal with a unified world. The solution is the G20. Then the next question comes, how do we ensure that the G20 succeeds? It's not going to be easy. Not going to be easy for the reasons that I gave, because everybody wants to take care of the cabin and the big powers are fighting. And in this context, trying to bring together the G20 is a challenge. So this is why I believe, and this is part 4 of my remarks, this is why I believe that Indonesia can play a very important role. Because Indonesia's biggest advantage, this is a very serious advantage. There are very few countries in the world today that are trusted by United States and trusted by China. Very few. You'll be surprised. And Indonesia is one of them. And indeed, I can tell you that when I did my interview with President Jokowi, I interviewed him before I wrote the article. I asked him a question about US-China relations. And this is what he said. I'm quoting what he said. That interview, by the way, was published in the Singapore Straits Times, and I think it may have been published in Indonesia also. He said, and I quote, President Jokowi, quote, "Both China and the US are two good friends of Indonesia. Indonesia wants a mutually beneficial partnership with the two countries based on international law. In addition to our economic partnership, Indonesia's relations with the two countries also aims to contribute to world peace and stability." And then he adds, "Given today's challenging situation, is this the right time for superpower rivalry? Question mark. This is my message to all countries. For Indonesia, cooperation is the best option. We are ready to be part of this." And I can tell you that the words that President Jokowi said to me are very wise words. This is exactly what the world needs. The world needs to see US and China collaborate to deal with the major global issues. And that's why it shows you the importance of leadership of G20. So that's my hope, therefore, is that since Indonesia is the country, one of the few countries that is trusted by United States and trusted by China, that it should work very hard to persuade these two countries to press the pause button on their US-China geopolitical contest and say, okay, you may want to compete, why don't you do it later on? First, let's fix the global problems. Let's fix COVID-19. Let's fix climate change. Let's come together to deal with the common threats of humanity. But not everybody can speak so frankly to the United States and to China. But the one country that can do so is Indonesia. And it helps a lot that you have that leader who's been in office a long time, who is supported by his own people, who enjoys a strong domestic standing, so he can speak with great authority, right? And that's a competitive advantage that Indonesia has. And I think that's the first and most important thing that Indonesia should be doing, to work as hard as it can through the G20 to persuade the US and China, please press the pause button and let's collaborate. And what's the second thing that Indonesia can do? And this brings me to the final part 5 of my remarks. You see, the great strength, the reason why Indonesia has succeeded in staying together as a country, even though it is so diverse. In fact, Indonesia is probably one of the most diverse countries in the whole world, is because you have the slogan of Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity. And frankly, the world, as we know, is a very diverse place. But Indonesia's ability to handle diversity is a great strength. And I want to say that, I referred earlier to Musyawarah and Mufakat. So what Indonesia needs to do is to inject the gene of Musyawarah and Mufakat into the G20 process and persuade the G20 countries that instead of coming to these meetings and doing grandstanding and giving great speeches and saying my country is the greatest, no. Why don't you sit down and listen? Listen to what the other countries are saying, and then try and see whether you can achieve a consensus. And that's what's broken down in the G20 process. The countries don't listen to each other. In fact, by the way, not only do they not listen to each other, they can hardly meet with each other, right? There was no, as you know, President Trump refused to attend G20 meetings. So very clearly, the one lesson I learned, I was a diplomat for 33 years. The one lesson I learned, that if you can put two people who are hostile towards each other in the same room and get them to talk to each other, you make a huge difference. And I say this with great personal experience. When I first attended ASEAN meetings in 1971, among the 5 ASEAN countries, there was so much suspicion and hostility between Malaysia and Indonesia because of confrontasi, between Malaysia and Singapore because Malaysia and Singapore had separated, between Philippines and Malaysia because Philippines was claiming Sabah. So there was so much suspicion. But after 20 years, when I went back to ASEAN meetings, the suspicion had gone. They learned to get along with each other. And what happened is because Indonesia injected musyawarah and mufakat into the ASEAN culture. So just as Indonesia's injection of musyawarah and mufakat transformed ASEAN and made it the second most successful regional organization in the world, Indonesia can inject musyawarah and mufakat into the G20 process. That will change the chemistry of the G20 significantly. So this is the opportunity that Indonesia has. There is a massive global misunderstanding now. There is a major global institution, G20, that is ready and that can actually provide a solution to the global challenges we face, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's climate change. I can discuss overfishing, you can discuss deforestation, you can discuss all these things. But all these things, if you need an institution to solve it, is the G20. So therefore, I hope, it's my sincere hope, that Indonesia will say, hey, we have a great global responsibility during our chairmanship of G20. We will do our best. And I know that if Indonesia does its best, it will not just be good for Indonesia, not just good for Southeast Asia and ASEAN, it will be good for the whole world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kishore. With the role Indonesia as president of G20, how can we be relevant where Jokowi has always been heavily focused on domestic issue? What is like the global perspective of him that we don't know as Indonesian?
Well, I think it's a very good that President Jokowi didn't travel overseas, didn't go around attending a lot of international meetings in his early years. I think it was very wise of him to focus on domestic development and on building infrastructure in Indonesia, reducing poverty in Indonesia, reforming the labor laws in Indonesia, laying the groundwork for foreign investors to come to Indonesia. I think he did all the right things. He laid the foundations in his early years. But now that he's in his second term, and now that he's had a very strong domestic record, he's in a good position now to participate in international leadership ventures like the G20. And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned that my article went viral in Indonesia because people agreed with it and disagreed with it. And I was actually very happy that many people disagreed with it, because the fact that people could disagree with it showed that Indonesia is today quite a vibrant democracy, that you have many different schools of thought, many different points of view. So that disagreement, I don't see that as a bad sign. I see that as a good sign. And frankly, I think the point, one key point I want to emphasize to an Indonesian audience is that why don't you go around, if you can, visit other countries which have populations, large populations, as large as Indonesia. Why don't you go and visit maybe Brazil, maybe Nigeria, and see the situation in these other countries. And in these countries, the people don't feel a sense of hope for the future in the same way that the Indonesians feel today, right? And you benefited from a leader whose only focus was on improving the condition of his people. And I saw this in my own eyes when when President Jokowi was governor of Indonesia. I spent one day with him in December 2013, traveling with him and seeing his common touch and seeing how he was very concerned about getting things done, and so that is a tremendous asset that you have in your current president. And I want to emphasize, by the way, that one reason why Indonesian democracy is successful is also because he was preceded by President SBY, who laid the foundations for Indonesian democracy in many ways by being so open-minded to different points of view, right? And being very open and willing to engage the world also. So it's through a cumulative process, Indonesia, have arrived, relatively speaking, at a happy destination. And frankly, I don't want to mention any of our fellow ASEAN countries, but just even look around ASEAN. Look around how troubled some of your neighbors are today, right? There are incredible leadership contests in your neighboring ASEAN countries also. So if you just compare Indonesia either with countries of the same size or even with countries in this region, Indonesia has done a far better job, I would say, over the last 10, 20 years than most countries in the world has. And you should celebrate what you have achieved. But of course, don't be satisfied. Build on what you have achieved and make it better from now on. But realize that it's actually very, very difficult to achieve what Indonesia has achieved so far. And because you have such a good, strong track record, you have the authority, the credibility to become a leader of G20. So if your country is in bad shape, you cannot become a good leader of G20. You cannot, because everybody is saying, oh, come on, they cannot even take care of the country. How can they run the G20? But Indonesia can say, we have taken very good care of our country. We have one of the best development records. We have one of the best democracies. And that gives you the credibility to provide the leadership to G20. And in many ways, the style of President Jokowi, which is understated, which is low-key, is exactly what is needed when you're dealing with these very, very loud, I call them elephants, but in some ways they're like loud tigers, China and United States. The quiet, understated leadership of President Jokowi could help to calm down these raging elephants and tell them, hey, calm down, we got more important things to do. And that's why I am actually optimistic that Indonesian can provide good leadership of G20, and I'm confident that Indonesia's leadership of G20 will be a success.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, thank you very much, Professor, for your insights, for your time, for sharing with us.